There we go. All right, everybody shut up! If you randomly hear me cheer or boo or something like that in the middle class, it's because I'm watching the Masters up here. I'm a very avid golfer, so. What do you mean reminding you? Didn't know the Masters was this week?
I forgot.
Okay, so you're not really big into golf.
I'm not like ridiculously big into it, but I do enjoy watching the Masters.
Yeah, this is like my top 2 favorite weeks of the year in golf.
I like
U.S. Open. British Open, I could take or leave. PGA is a joke. But Masters is probably the best real golf. And then the U.S. Open I like because they turn the courses into these monsters. They just stop like mowing the rough like 3 months before the tournament. So the pros come out there and they look like normal humans. You know, if they hit the ball 2 inches off of the fairway, the ball's like missing. You know, they're looking for it in the rough, and these guys are out there breaking their wrists and stuff. It's funny. Well, yeah. Well, that's what then makes it. But that's where some of our most historic golf stories have come from. Like the 2001 U.S. Open at Pebble Beach was one of the hardest setups ever. Second place was 2 over par. Okay. First place was 16 under par. I'll let you, even if you're not a golf fan, I'll let you guess who shot that. If you're not a golf fan, who's the one golfer you've probably heard of? He plays golf? It was Tiger Woods. All right, so let's do this assignment, then we'll make it more complicated. Everybody in here is in contact with their team leads for the hackathon, starting to brainstorm stuff, blah, blah, blah. We're getting pumped up tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Yeah. You got no information. Did you see who your team lead is on Slack?
No.
Well, if I look in general on Slack, you should see the list of all the teams. Find your name. Well, it's on Slack. It's in general on Slack. The general channel on Slack. There should be a list of all the teams. Find your name on there, and the one that's colored orange or something is your team lead. And most of the team leads reached out to their team members via email, I think. And then maybe they've set up some Slack groups or that kind of stuff for like a private channel. All right, remember it's tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. across the hall. They'll have breakfast, crap, bagels, and stuff like that. And then we have lunch and dinner. Usually one of them sandwiches and stuff. The other one's pizza. I don't know if it's the same thing this year, but that's usually what it is. And then we have coffee going all day and that kind of stuff. But should be a good time. All right, so for our homework assignment, we were to update our roll method to take in this roll string that kind of looked like something like this. And we had to kind of process through that string similar to process expression, where we had to peel out the numbers. All right. Now, if we look at this and we kind of look at the patterns, we have some number, possibly multiple numbers. So, I mean, we could have like 33 D4, something like that. If you didn't make yours work for that, that's okay. I didn't necessarily make that crystal clear, but I'm going to solve it as if that's the case. So you have some integer value prior to the letter D, followed by the number of sides, which is also some integer value. That makes sense? So you potentially could have a D43. That would be allowed. You could have a 33 D43s, which would be a really unique roll. Okay, but if you have that die in your bag, then everybody's envious because you're the cool kid, especially if it's made of asteroid. All right, so we need to parse through a string and parse out those individual pieces. All right. Now, I purposely wrote this string such that there's no spaces in here. If you wanted to check for spaces, you could. But this is the format of our string. So we know the very first thing we'd run into is a number, right? And then we're going to keep collecting that number until we do what? Hit a D. right? As soon as we hit the character D in our string, we know that the number we've been collecting is done. And that's the quantity of dice that I'm going to be rolling, right? All right, so let's start with that. So I'm just going to dump this guy. Now, did I actually add this? Did I say add it to dice or to dice collection? Whatever. Let's say dice collection. All right, so we're going to have a couple of variables. We're going to have one variable maybe called cur quantity. And this is going to be the a string that we're going to be using to build up our current quantity. All right. Then we're also going to be building up our cur sides. So those are the two pieces of information we want to build up. So for this first guy, we want cur quantity to be the string 2, and we want cur sides to be the string 6. Make sense? Those are the two values we're trying to capture from our string. All right, so we're going to start walking our string until we hit the first D. And at that point, we're going to be collecting those characters inside of cur quantity. Now, we're going to go through every single character inside of roll string, right? We're going to look at each one and decide what to do at that point in time in the string. Okay? So, I'm going to need a loop that goes through every character of a string. That's our stock for loop, right? For I in range 0 to length of roll string. So that will take I on a voyage between bucket 0 and bucket length of roll string minus 1 that we can then use to access that character at that bucket. Okay, so now we're going to look at that. You look at each character until we see a D. All right, so we're gonna solve this in little tiny pieces. We're gonna pretend like all we're looking for right now is the quantity, and then we'll add some additional constraints as we need to. So if roll string at bucket I is not equal to a D, that means I'm collecting it inside of cur quantity. Cur quantity is equal to cur quantity plus roll string at bucket I. I'm going to start collecting it. Okay? Now, let's put it in an else for right now. If it's not equal to a D, I'm collecting it. If it is equal to a D, what does that mean? That means I have my full quantity, right? So now I need to start looking for number of sides. Does that make sense? So I have my full quantity, so I can go ahead and get the number out of that if I wanted to, or I could just leave it in there for the my final opportunity to roll that. But I need to somehow let myself know that I'm no longer searching for a D. I'm now searching for either what? A plus sign, or I run out of characters. The end of the string, right? So I need to know whether or not I am currently collecting my quantity, or if I'm currently collecting my sides. So I'm going to create a little variable up here. Should collect quantity. I'll just start that guy off at true, letting myself know that I'm going to be collecting quantity. Okay? So now I'm going to say if I should be collecting quantity, that is, should collect quantity, and my roll string is not equal to D. So if I'm supposed to be looking for a quantity, and this guy right here is equivalent to me saying equal true. Remember, a Boolean expression is any expression that boils down to a single value of true or false. So if this boils down to true, is true equal to true? It is. That's true. So I actually did not need the equal sign to true here. I could just say whatever this guy is true or false. Right? I'm going to flip him to false in a few minutes. I'll leave it like this because this probably reads better for most of you. Where we're saying if this variable has a current value that's equal to true, we're going to do this. So I'll leave it like this, even though the more correct way of writing it would be that. Because it boils down to a single value of true or false already. All right, so while we should be collecting our quantity and we're not looking at a D, we'll go ahead and collect our quantity. Okay. Else if we should be collecting our quantity and we are looking at a D, I'm going to be real explicit about these steps. All right, so and the roll string we're currently looking at is equal to a D. If that's the case, then I know I'm done collecting my current quantity, right? So what do I want to do? I want to flip should collect quantity to be the other value. Because I'm no longer collecting quantity. Now I'm collecting sides. So I'll say should collect quantity is now equal to false. I have finished collecting my quantity. And now the next time through this loop, I want to start collecting my sides. Else if should collect quantity is equal to false, which means I should be collecting my sides, right? If I'm not collecting my quantity, I'm collecting my sides. Okay, so if should collect quantity is equal to false, and my roll string at bucket I is not equal to a plus sign, because that's my end point for collecting a quantity, right? I know once this loop finally ends, I'm going to have something stuck inside of, or rather, that's my end point for collecting my sides. I know once my loop ends, I'm going to have one last thing trapped inside of number of sides, right? Because my strings could end on a number, not on a plus sign. But if I have, well, they always will end on a number, not on a plus sign. But if I have multiple rolls in there, my first number of sides in this case, he ends when I hit a plus sign. My second number of sides here, he ends when I just naturally hit the end of the string. I've run out of characters to check. So then I'll have one last value stuck in there that I'll need to do my final processing for. Okay? So, as long as I'm not looking at a plus sign, and I should not be collecting quantities, that means I should be collecting sides. Make sense? All right. So what will I do? I'm going to say cur sides is equal to cur sides concatenated with roll string at bucket I. I'll start collecting my number for number of sides. Else. Now, if you want to really play it out, just say, okay, well, else if should collect quantity is equal to false and roll string is equal to a plus. But that's my only other option, right? I'm either collecting quantity or I'm collecting sides and I'm looking at a D or not looking at a D, or I'm looking at a plus, or finally my else is I must not be looking at a plus. Okay? Otherwise, I must be collecting my quantity. So we'll spell it out. It'll make you feel better. Else if should collect quantity is equal to false, which means that we're currently collecting sides. And roll string at bucket I is equal to a plus sign. That means I have finished collecting my number of sides. And it's roll time. Right? I need to create a die with a certain number of sides. Now, I heard some people bantering back and forth before class, a couple different approaches to this, right? If I'm in this case, I can physically create two six-sided dies, or I can create one six-sided die and roll it twice. Pick your poison. Okay, that doesn't necessarily matter. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just create a die of the correct number of sides. And then I'm going to roll it the correct number of times, the quantity number of times. Now I'm going to need a variable up here for my sum because I'm effectively summing a whole bunch of rolls together. All right, so I'm going to need to keep track of my sum. I'm going to remember my sum. All right, so now what I'm going to say here is I'm going to get my integer version of current quantity, which is going to be int current quantity, right? That's going to be a number. So we'll say number of rolls is equal to the integer version of current quantity. We didn't have to store that in a variable, but we will. You'll find as an inexperienced programmer, it'll always be better to be super, super, super explicit. You'll run into less problems. Okay, so I'm really spelling it out here. All right, so I'll remember the integer version of my number of rolls inside of a variable, and that's going to be the int version of my current quantity. Then I'm going to remember my number of sides is going to be my int version of cur sides. So I'll convert that guy to an int. Now I'll create a dice. And when I create a dice object, I give it the number of sides, right? So I'll give him number of sides. So now I have a new dice object called D, and he was built in terms of number of sides. And now I'm going to roll that dice number of rolls times. So I want to do something multiple times. That's a loop, right? So I'm going to say for I in range 0 to number of sides. That's how many times I'm going to do something. What am I going to do each time? I'm going to add to my sum d dot roll. I'll roll the dice, adding it to my sum. Yeah.
For I range 0 to number of rolls.
Yes, number of rolls. Thank you. These are the number of times I'm rolling the dice. Number of sides is what I use to build my dice. All right, so I'm going to do this number of rolls times. Each time through, I'm going to roll the dice I just built, which had number of sides, and I'm going to add it to my sum. All right, now, after I've done all my rolling and added everything to my sum, I need to zero out my cur sides and cur quantity. So we're ready to go back through and do it again, potentially. So cur sides is equal to the empty string. Cur quantity is equal to the empty string. So the next time through, when I spin back up and I'm still walking through my string, I am doing this again, figuring out what quantity and what number of sides I'm building up. Otherwise, we're going to keep tacking numbers on the end of the old one. We'll start having giant quantities and giant number of sides, right? So if the first time through, I had, where's my example? Okay, I had 33 D43s. So I had 33 quantity. And I don't zero that out. The next time through, I'll have 331 quantity. Because I forgot to get rid of the 33. So now I tacked a 1 onto the end of that. Now the next time I'm rolling a lot. Similarly, instead of it just being a 43-sided die, it'll be a 436-sided die. Right, so I need to make sure I empty them here after I do a single roll. That way I start fresh, and the next time through, the 33 is gone, the 43 is gone, and now I'm building up a 1 and I'm building up a 6. Make sense? So this will add my number of rolls of the correct number of sides to my sum. I'll zero out cur sides and cur quantity, spin back up, and the for loop will do its little magic again. Lastly, when I fall out of the for loop here, I'll put a little comment here. I have one last roll. Well, I'll say roll to do. possibly many times of rolling. So I really need to do this exact same logic here another time. So I need to grab my last quantity, grab my last cur sides, build a dice, roll that dice some number of times. I need to do it one more time. Now, the reality is, since I have this code here and the identical code here, it might make sense to pull that into a method that we can call multiple times. So we might have a method here. Actually, before we write the method, let's just run it. Let's see it work first. And then we'll, all I'm saying is that this isn't tons and tons and tons of code. So you could make the argument that, hey, we'll just repeat it twice, not the end of the world. You could make that argument. All right, and this probably isn't code that's going to substantially change. But one thing you do want to be wary of when you are writing code is you want to make an effort not to repeat code too much. In this case, we have, what is it, 5 lines? We have 5 lines of code that we are technically repeating. It's not code that's likely to change, because if we're repeating 5 lines of code in 20 places around our program, and then we make a small change to that code in one place, we have to then go make that change in 19 other places. In that situation, you would have wished you would put it into a function so that you can just change the function once, and then all 20 of those places are already calling that now fixed function or updated function. All right, so in this case, it's only 2 places. They're basically right next to each other. If we change it in one, we could pretty conveniently change it in the other. We don't anticipate really having to change this. You could probably make a reasonable argument that throwing some random method out here somewhere might muddy the waters more than just leaving this be. You could make that argument. Both of them are reasonable approaches in this case. Okay, if this was 600 lines of code, probably throw it into a function. If for nothing else than just readability of your code, right? Because this function then becomes unwieldy. All right, so when we exit our for loop, we have one last number of one last quantity in sides to do. We do that roll, and then finally we return our sum, the final sum of all our rolls. Okay, now what I'm going to do just for error checking here, because if I just run this right now, in fact, let's just go ahead and do this. I'll come down here. We're actually not using our players. I'll create my dice bag. I'm not even going to add anything to my dice bag because my roll method doesn't require me having preloaded rolls in there, right? Or preloaded dice. It just generates them on the fly. So it's kind of a weird function of my dice bag, but this is like that upgraded version where you just whisper to the dice bag what you want him to roll, and he just gives you a number. Like, here you go, buddy. I got you. Like, you would totally be the envy of people at the conference, because you do have people at those conventions that do believe they are magic users. Yeah, I've been hit by fake fireballs at those things before. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to give it one of our examples here. So I'll just grab my crazy example here. This is my 33 D4, blah, 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 or D43s. All right, so this is going to roll 30. It's going to roll a D43 33 times. So I'm going to get a number between 1 and 43 33 times, and then it's going to add to that a single D6. Now, when I roll this and I print out a number, we can say, oh, that looks perfect. But we're just going to have this random number, right? So I'll go ahead and run this. Did I not build it up a last time? quantity, quantity. So this is when I'm building up. Oh, I don't flip it back. After I get my value here, I need to make sure that the next time through I say should collect quantity is equal to true. I need to go back and start collecting quantities the next time around. So there's my 660, which we could say, looks like a big number, probably right. Probably. All right. Now, we might want to do a little double checking on ourselves here. And why don't I go ahead and why don't I say, we'll just put a little print statement inside of our code when we're actually doing the rolls. Just saying, about to roll some number of D something, proving that we got it. So here's where I actually do my rolls. So maybe right after this, I'll just do a print about to roll. What's the placeholders for this? Have I shown you formatted strings before? Have you seen these? Have you seen a print? Is it printf? No, it's this. Have you seen that before? Let me show this to you. This makes life a little bit easier, assuming I'm not screwing up. About to roll this many D, this many, and so I'm going to roll number of rolls, number of sides. Do the same thing down here. So not an F string. Wait, hold on. Am I doing Python 3? I need to make sure I'm running Python 3 here. Yeah, it is. This is more just convenience. I'm just, instead of concatenating all the stuff together, I'm showing you kind of a convenient way of doing it. Let me just make sure I'm getting the syntax right for this. Oh, sorry. This syntax is like a printf in like C, the one I had before where I had like two placeholders and then some commas for what to fill in there. So an F string, you put a little F before the double quotes. This allows you to embed in your string kind of like, here's a variable, I want you to resolve that variable in place by surrounding it by curly braces. So it allows you to build kind of a friendlier looking string. Let's just make sure I appropriately fixed it here, and then I'll take questions. Yeah, so there's my about to roll 33 D43. That looked legit. About to roll 1D6. So we feel pretty confident now that I pieced out those things. I wrote this string in terms of my two individual pieces rather than some coming in string. So we feel pretty confident here with our for loop going through number of rolls, number of times, and then rolling my dice. So we feel pretty confident now about our string. All right, so I probably would never test you over F strings. This is more of a convenience thing. So, you know, this is the same thing as saying about to roll, end double quote, plus number then the string version of number of rolls, plus the string D, plus the string version of number of sides. So it would kind of be a somewhat inconvenient string of concatenations you'd have to do. This makes life a little bit more convenient. So these are F strings, and they came into existence in Python 3. There is, I'll just actually go back to that page I brought up. There looked like there was a format thing that's similar to what I was mentioning about the printf thing from like the C language. Yeah, this was the, here, let me, this guy right here, that's what I was mixing the two syntaxes. So this allows you to kind of create a string with some placeholders, and then you do this dot format at the end of it with name and age. And I think you actually maybe saw that in your book. You see that in the book? But you didn't see F strings in the book, did you? Okay. Yeah, so F strings are kind of the new cool kid way of doing it. So it's this, but a little bit more convenient, I think. But then again, I had to go look up the syntax for it real quick. But if you're using Python all the time, I would expect I'll remember F strings for at least another month or two until I stop using Python for some period of time and then come back. So it's, it's whatever it is. So in my mind, the things I'm remembering are, oh, I think there's a cool way of remembering or formatting strings in Python. I'm pretty sure they're called F strings. If you don't remember that, just do your normal concatenation thing and move on with life. It's just, you're going to get the same result. You just had to work a little harder for it. Okay, so F strings are kind of cool for convenience. I won't test you over it. This is just, I refer to things like this as syntactic sugar. It's something we could pull off in a much less convenient way, but this just kind of makes our lives easier. And behind the scenes, it's probably doing the full concatenation thing that we would have written ourselves. Okay, so questions about this. So now, oh, go ahead.
Well, couldn't you also use the split function to split the string apart into a list?
You could. So you could use split to split like on a plus sign initially. That will give you individual pieces. So if we use that, let's just kind of walk through that as a piece. So if I say this guy, I'll go ahead and say print this dot split on plus signs. And we've seen split before already, right? Okay. So yeah, it becomes a funny thing. I tell you, you can't use anything that I haven't taught in class yet. I don't remember what I've taught in class. So it's a funny thing. All right, so here's what you're saying. You can go ahead and split it on plus signs. Now you get your individual parts, right? Now you can split your individual parts on a D, right? So let's actually take his approach, and we'll see that it's going to be a lot shorter code, right? All right, I would say that, that's actually a better solution, let's say. I would say this was maybe my intent for you to go through something like this, kind of, if you remember at the end of class, I kind of mentioned kind of like process expression. So let's kind of work through walking through strings and stuff like that. But hey, you have these tools available to you. So so let's write a roll 2. We'll call it roll 2. And this guy will also take in a roll string like this. And the very first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and get our, we'll call this the roll strings is equal to roll string dot split on plus signs, something like that. So now I'll get my array that kind of looks like this. And then I can go ahead and for each of those, split that on the individual pieces. So for I in range 0 to, I'm going to call this the roll strings. I'm going to say for I in range to this dot length of the roll strings, I can do something. And what do I want to do? I'm going to maybe say parts is equal to the roll strings at bucket I dot split on D. And then I'm going to need a sum. It's equal to 0. And now I'll go ahead and say for I in range of 0 to the int version of parts at bucket 0. So the numeric part, my quantity part. And I'm going to create a dice. So I'll say D is equal to dice of the int version parts at bucket 1. So that parts thing, let me just show you what I'm doing here. If this is my string that I'm splitting, parts at bucket 0 will be this guy. Parts at bucket 1 will be this guy. Quantity and sides. All right, so here's my number of sides. I build my dice. Here's my quantity. I have my loop. And what am I going to do? I'm going to say sum is equal to sum plus d dot roll. Like that. And if we wanted to put our print statement in there proving that we're doing this the right way, I'll steal this real quick. And we are initially rolling here, since it's just a string, we'll just say parts at bucket 1. This is parts at bucket 0, like that. We'll spin through number of quantity times, add to our sum, spin back around, do it again for the next thing inside of my roll strings. When all is said and done, return sum. So then down here, get rid of this, I'll call roll 2 on this guy. About to roll 43 D33, about to roll 61. Here's my final roll. So that is a, I'll call it that's a better solution. Definitely a less fun solution though, right? This was fun, wasn't it? I mean, this is kind of, I mean, really, if you look at this function right here, this function kind of captures everything we've done in this class up to this point. We have variables, we have if statements, we have loops, we have concatenation, okay, we have lists, collections, right? So this is like the course so far, this one function. Where this is us recognizing a power tool and saying, I'm just gonna use that dude a couple times. Okay, notice we didn't even have to go through one extra time and grab our final rolls because the split did the work for us, right? Yeah, so this is a good solution. How many people did it this way? How many people did it closer to this way? How many people did it a completely different way that worked? How'd you do it? Okay.
I thought you were trying to take the program and make it into that string statement, not take the string statement.
What do you mean take the program and make it into that string statement?
Sorry, take the kind of dice that were being added in and then make it into a...
Turn it into that string?
Yeah, turn it into that string. I misunderstood.
Okay, so you had, well, let's go that route because that's kind of an interesting problem to solve. So you had our dice collection where we're adding a bunch of dice to it, right? And if you happen to add 2 D6s and you happen to add 3 D8s, you produced a string of 2d6 plus 3d8, something like that. Okay, yeah, that's actually an interesting problem. Let's solve that. We got 6 minutes. So what I would do here is inside of roll, I would have a, inside of dice, I would allow a dice object to advertise to me his string representation. If he's a 6-sided die, he should be able to produce for me the string D6. Okay, that way I can ask a dice for a string. So I'm here inside my dice class here, and I'm just going to write a function called def. Let's call this guy getString. And he's going to return here. We'll use our f strings. So he's going to return d self dot sides. So that's what he'll return for us, right? Something like that. So if you want to see what that does real quick, just so we can practice with dice, I'll come down here. I'll just do this guy. I'm going to say I'll say d is equal to dice 6, something like that. Then I'll print d dot toString, and it should print out d6. Oh, was it getString? Yeah. So there's my d6. All right. So I have that guy. So now we already have the ability inside of our dice collection to add dice to this guy. And he builds up a big list of dice objects. Now those dice objects may be, those dice objects might be duplicated. I might have 7 or 8 D6s inside of that collection, right? That kind of thing. Okay, so if we want to call this guy, so we'll say def get roll string, something like this. And what it's going to do is he's going to go through my list of dice. And for each element in that list of dice, he's going to build up a quantity of how many of those are in there, right? So he's going to count how many of those dice are in there. But the catch is every single time he finds one of those, he needs to remove it. He needs to, that way we're not, if we have 3 D6s, we don't want to print out plus 3d6 3 times. We want to bring all the d6s together. Make sense? All right, so a couple of, anybody have an interesting solution to this? I can give you, how about I give you a hint? How about an interesting solution dealing with dictionaries? Go ahead.
Well, basically, that's kind of what I did. Basically, made it so that all the things were, all the dice that were listed were the one single list, and then I went through a loop that identified where they were and then added them to a dictionary and had those terms in it. Based off of values that I added previously.
Okay. Now, remember, if we look at our book here, we had a thing in our dictionary for dictionaries, I think it was called get, that allowed us to get a key and then provided a default value. Remember that guy? Okay, was it get? I think it was get. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for I in range 0 to length of self dot the dice. So those are all my dice, correct? And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to create a dictionary up here. So we're going to call this guy roll dictionary. And he's going to start off as the empty dictionary. And each time through here, I'm going to say roll dictionary at bucket self dot the dice at bucket I dot get strings. That's going to be a string representation like a D6 or a D8 or a D12, right? So I'm setting a value in my dictionary, and it's a value at that bucket, at bucket D6 or bucket D8 or bucket D12. And I'm going to set it equal to roll dictionary dot get. Here, this will actually, let's call this guy, I'll just call it dice string here. It'll make it look a little cleaner. So I'll store my dice string and I'll say roll dictionary at bucket dice string is equal to roll dictionary dot get dice string with a default value of 0 if it's not there. Plus 1. So I'm going to go through, and the very first time through, it's not going to find, for example, D6. So it's going to give me a 0. Then I'm going to add 1 to that. Now it's a 1. So I just set D6 to 1. The next time through, it'll find a 1. So it won't have to default to 0. I just set D6 to 2. So on and so forth. So it's going to go through my entire thing here. Ultimately, and just because of time here, let me just do a print roll dictionary. And then down here, I'll get my dice bag. And I'll say my dice bag dot add dice 6 dice 6. So we'll do 3d6 2d8, something like that. And then I'll say my dice bag dot get roll string. So see how I got 3d6 2d8? And then I can just go through there and build my string from that. But we're out of time, so I just wanted to show you that real quick. So yeah, go through and look through that. I realize I sprinted through that real quick there at the end, but that's actually a pretty cool problem and if I do say so myself, a pretty cool solution to that using dictionaries. All right, so go through and maybe I'll put this on Slack. Go through and try to understand what that solution's doing, because it's something very powerful you can do with dictionaries, specifically using that version of get that allows you to have a default value. All right, so no homework over the weekend because we have the hackathon. So I will see everyone bright and early tomorrow at 8 a.m. and I will be watching the Masters on the giant screen TV over there. So feel free to ask me questions. Yep.
So I emailed Professor Locklear on Monday.